When you hear the phrase emotional detachment, most people think of coldness, indifference, or heartlessness. But that's a surface level misunderstanding. Emotional detachment, when practiced with wisdom and awareness, is one of the highest forms of self-mastery. It is not about turning your heart to stone. It is about reclaiming your control and refusing to be emotionally enslaved to someone else's choices, presence, or validation. When you apply this principle with intention, especially in the context of someone who has taken you for granted or pulled away, it becomes a strategic move that speaks volumes without saying a word. In the moments when someone begins to withdraw from you, whether emotionally, physically, or in communication, the natural impulse is to chase, to explain, to seek closure. But that reaction is exactly what keeps the cycle of emotional dependence alive. It puts your power in their hands. Emotional detachment is not just silence. It is a deliberate inward shift. You are no longer chasing answers. You are no longer performing for attention. You are no longer reacting. You are choosing stillness. And in that stillness, you become powerful. You see, most people are addicted to emotional response. They expect you to beg. They expect you to panic. They expect that when they go cold, you'll turn up the emotional heat. But when you do the opposite, when you respond with stillness, with grace, with emotional self-control, you disturb their expectations. You disrupt their ego. You shake the image they had of you being dependent on them for happiness. That disruption is what makes them notice your absence. That silence is what triggers them to miss you. Because now they are left with nothing but the echo of their own actions and the absence of your energy to cover it up. This strategy is not about punishing someone. It's about giving them the rare opportunity to sit with what life feels like without your presence. When you're always available, always texting, always checking in, you become familiar, and familiarity over time breeds comfort. But when you step back, they are left to sit in a space once filled by your attention, your effort, and your emotional warmth. The sudden coldness creates contrast. And contrast is what the human mind remembers. In relationships, emotional energy is like currency. The more you give without awareness, the less it's valued. But when you conserve that energy, redirect it toward your own healing, your own projects, your own life, suddenly your absence becomes more noticeable than your presence ever was. Detachment shifts the dynamic. You are no longer dancing to their rhythm. You are no longer a part of the emotional loop they thought they controlled. You become unpredictable. And unpredictability stirs the mind, awakens reflection, and generates curiosity. Now, let's be honest, this is not easy. Emotional detachment feels unnatural at first. When you care deeply, silence feels like abandonment. But here's the truth. Choosing detachment isn't you abandoning them. It's you refusing to abandon yourself. It's you saying, I am no longer willing to carry the emotional weight for both of us. It's a bold internal declaration that your peace is not negotiable. The very act of detachment is an act of self-respect. You're not playing a game. You're breaking a pattern. There is a profound beauty in realizing you don't have to argue, beg, or explain yourself. You simply let the distance do the talking. Your absence begins to highlight your presence. Your lack of pursuit becomes the loudest statement you could make. It sends a message not just to them, but to yourself. I choose me. I choose peace. I choose balance over chaos. And in that energy, you become magnetic. People don't miss the person who's always available. They miss the person who walked away with dignity. They miss the one who stopped talking and started growing. They miss the energy that no longer surrounds them. The cold strategy works not because it manipulates them into regret, but because it forces them to sit in the reality of what they've lost. And when you truly detach, you don't just stop texting, you stop hoping, you stop waiting, you stop needing their recognition to validate your worth. You stop leaking your emotional energy into someone who hasn't shown up with consistency. This form of emotional strength makes you deeply attractive, not in a physical way, but in an energetic way. Your presence becomes something rare. You are no longer emotionally reactive, no longer moved by their breadcrumbs of attention. You become steady, solid, rooted. And they feel that difference. Whether they admit it or not, they begin to notice. And when they notice, they reflect. And that reflection becomes the seed of missing you, not for who you were, but for who you became when you chose to detach. What you're doing is not about cold revenge, it's about clear boundaries. You're no longer giving someone else the power to determine how you feel each day. You are choosing to heal in silence, to grow in solitude, and to let your transformation speak louder than your emotions ever could. The moment you detach emotionally, you take your power back, not to hurt them, but to protect you. And that shift is what makes all the difference. When your emotions feel like they're spiraling, when thoughts of him dominate your day, and you can't seem to silence the ache inside you, it's easy to think that the only solution is to reach out, to reconnect, to hear something, anything that will soothe the emotional storm. But that's the trap. That's the emotional addiction calling you back into the same cycle that drained you in the first place. The truth is, the longer you stay in that loop of waiting, checking your phone, replaying old messages, or stalking his social media, the more energy you give away. And that energy is your power. When you pull it back, when you redirect it toward yourself, that's when everything begins to shift. Reclaiming your energy doesn't start with a dramatic act. It begins in the small, quiet choices you make every single day. The moment you wake up and resist the urge to check if he viewed your story. The second you stop reading into the silence, stop trying to decode every absence, that's when you begin. Instead of using your precious mental space to analyze what he's doing or who he's thinking about, you redirect that space toward rebuilding your own foundation. You begin to turn the focus inward. You pour your time into learning something new, into creating something that fulfills you, into developing routines that energize you. You see, attention is like sunlight. Whatever you shine it on will grow. If you keep shining it on confusion, pain, and loss, that's exactly what will expand in your life. But the moment you take that attention and redirect it onto your own life, your growth, your healing, your purpose, something incredible happens. You begin to rise. You begin to feel your strength coming back. Not because he called, not because he returned, but because you stop needing that call to feel alive again. There is a massive shift that takes place when you stop centering your life around someone else's presence or absence. When you pull your energy back. When you stop sending emotional signals out into the universe, begging for a response, you become grounded. You become centered in yourself. That's when peace begins to find its way back to you. And it's not the kind of peace that comes from a conversation or an apology. It's the peace that comes from no longer abandoning yourself to hold on to someone else. It might feel strange at first. You're so used to pouring into them. You're used to giving without limits, to being emotionally available even when they weren't. You trained yourself to expect nothing while giving everything. But now you're flipping the script. You're taking that same intensity, that same devotion, and you're turning it inward. And that's where the transformation begins. Start simple. Wake up and set an intention for the day, not around them, but around you. What do you want to feel? What do you want to build? What do you want to learn? Make small commitments to yourself and keep them. Not because you need to prove anything to anyone, but because that's how you reclaim your self-trust. That's how you teach yourself that you matter. That's how you remind yourself that your life doesn't revolve around who stayed or who left. It revolves around who you choose to become. Redirecting your energy is the silent revolution. You don't announce it. You just begin. And as you do, you'll notice something strange. the pain begins to fade. Not because you suppressed it, but because you stopped feeding it. Every time you choose to act on behalf of your future self rather than your wounded self, you heal a little more. And as you heal, you glow differently. Your energy becomes harder to access. You become the one who is no longer waiting, no longer begging, no longer attached. And people feel that. That's when he begins to miss you. Not when you send one more message, not when you leave one more voicemail, but when your energy is no longer directed toward him, when your vibration changes, when you're no longer living in reaction to his behavior, but instead living in alignment with your highest self. That's when the silence becomes powerful. That's when your absence becomes a statement. And not just to him, but to the universe. You're declaring that you're ready to move forward. You're choosing wholeness over dependency. You're choosing focus over distraction. And it doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean the pain wasn't real. It means you've decided that your healing is more important than keeping someone else comfortable. It means you've outgrown the role of emotional caretaker for someone who never asked how you were doing. It means you're finally writing yourself into the center of your own story. Energy is everything. Where it goes, your life follows. When your energy is scattered, sent in 1,000 emotional directions, chasing closure, replaying hurt, you stay stuck. But the moment you call your energy back to yourself, you begin to shift the narrative. You stop chasing and start creating. You stop waiting and start building. You stop missing them and start rediscovering you. And in that process, you become the one they can't forget, not because you begged, but because you became too powerful to ignore. When you go silent, it's not about playing games or manipulating someone's emotions. It's about creating distance that allows truth to rise to the surface. Silence is a space of reflection, a mirror held up to the one who used to take your presence for granted. In that stillness, they begin to feel what they never paid attention to before. When you remove your voice, your energy, your warmth, and your availability, what remains is a void. One that echoes louder than any words ever could. And in that void, something happens. A man begins to hear his own thoughts without your presence buffering them. He starts to feel the absence, not just of your texts or calls, but of the energy you consistently poured into him, the effort you made, the emotional safety you gave. This kind of silence is cold but not cruel. It is intentional. It is rooted in self-respect and awareness. It is a decision to no longer entertain inconsistency. It is the moment you stop explaining your worth and instead allow your absence to explain everything for you. Silence is the unexpected teacher. It forces the other person to reckon with the space you once filled, effortlessly, loyally. And the truth is, most people never realize what they had until it's no longer showing up for them in ways they assumed it always would. A woman's silence can shake a man in ways he never anticipated, because what he thought was secure, your presence, your affection, your time, suddenly becomes uncertain. The patterns he took for granted are broken. You're no longer replying right away. You're no longer watching his stories or liking his posts. You're no longer feeding his ego with your steady attention. And in that disruption, he feels discomfort. That discomfort is what opens his eyes. That silence starts to replay in his mind. It makes him question, why is she reacting like she used to? Why is she so calm, so still? And in that space, regret starts to bloom. The silence is not passive, it's active. It's not void of power, it is power. It forces him to confront himself. No more distractions. No more emotionally coasting on your energy. He's left alone with the reality that you are no longer emotionally accessible. And accessibility is something people only realize the value of once it's restricted. Your silence becomes the loudest thing in his life. He can't escape it because it reminds him with every passing day that you've shifted, That you're no longer holding the door open with your feelings exposed. That you've chosen your peace over his unpredictability. What many don't understand is that silence can do what words never could. You could write paragraphs, pour out your soul, try to explain your hurt, but sometimes silence says it better. It says, I no longer owe you my vulnerability. It says, I am not begging to be understood. It says, you will now sit with the emptiness you helped create. And when a man is truly connected to you, when he truly valued what you brought into his life, that silence will torment him. Not because it's meant to be cruel, but because it forces him to wake up. It breaks the spell of comfort and makes him realize that what he lost wasn't just a woman, it was a sanctuary. Silence is also healing for you. It gives you time to detach from the emotional roller coaster. It gives you space to reclaim your inner power without the constant noise of confusion and mixed signals. It gives your nervous system a break from the exhaustion of being emotionally available to someone who wasn't available to you. And in that calm, in that quiet, you begin to rebuild. You start to see things clearly, not through the lens of emotion, but from a place of clarity and logic. You realize where you were overextending, where you were abandoning yourself just to feel seen, and where your love became more about endurance than connection. This cold strategy is not about pretending you don't care. It's about choosing not to waste your care where it's unappreciated. It's about learning that silence is sacred, that not every feeling needs to be shared, that sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. Because when you stop reaching out, when you stop explaining, when you stop reacting, you take back the energy that was being drained. And that shift becomes magnetic because now he feels what you felt. He tastes the confusion, the uncertainty, the distance. And unlike before, you're no longer there to soothe it away. And here's the part most women don't realize: silence builds value. It tells him that you have a life, that you are not emotionally dependent on his attention to feel secure. It tells him that your self-worth isn't attached to his validation. And in a world where people expect instant reactions and emotional availability at all times, your silence becomes rare. It becomes valuable. It sets you apart. Because the woman who can remain still, who doesn't chase, who doesn't react, is the woman who is remembered. The one who becomes a mystery. And mystery always creates curiosity. Curiosity leads to reflection. Reflection leads to longing. The silence you hold is not empty. It is full of your power. It's layered with the truth of who you are and what you've chosen. It's the most unapologetic form of self-respect. And it leaves a man with no choice but to finally sit with what he's lost. Not because you screamed it, not because you demanded he see it, but because the silence made it undeniable. Emotional detachment is not about becoming numb or heartless. It is about reclaiming your peace in the middle of emotional chaos. It is about choosing not to be shaken every time someone else makes a move, choosing not to react out of insecurity or desperation, and choosing to stay grounded in your own energy. When you become emotionally detached, you step out of the cycle of overthinking, over-explaining, and over-feeling. You start to see things for what they are, not through the filter of what you wish they could be. This is the moment when you no longer get lost in his actions, his silences, or his inconsistencies. You stop assigning meaning to everything he does or doesn't do. Instead, you begin assigning more meaning to what you need, what you feel, and what you want your reality to be. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop trying to control things that are beyond your control. You no longer try to chase closeness with someone who's comfortable keeping you at a distance. You no longer beg for the bare minimum. You simply observe. And in observation, you gather power. You become the one who watches, not the one who chases. You become the one who decides, not the one who waits to be chosen. That shift in perspective changes everything. Because now, instead of reacting emotionally, you respond strategically. You don't take the bait when they try to test your boundaries. You don't fold every time they pull back. You stay calm, collected, and controlled. Because your emotions are no longer in their hands. People begin to feel your absence more intensely when they realize they can no longer affect you emotionally. That's when your silence and your detachment become a mirror they can't ignore. A man who used to rely on your emotional reactions to validate himself starts to feel confused when you don't react at all. He starts wondering what changed, why you're so quiet, why you're so still. And that stillness will disturb him, not because you've done something wrong, but because he can no longer feed off your emotional availability. He can no longer predict your responses. You've broken the cycle. Detachment allows you to hold space between what someone does and how you feel about it. It gives you room to pause, assess, and choose how to proceed. It gives you control over your emotional thermostat. You're no longer turned on or off by someone else's behavior. This is the kind of power that people rarely understand until they witness it. The woman who used to cry, plead, or explain now says nothing. Not because she doesn't care, but because she's finally caring for herself. That shift creates an emotional void in the other person. Suddenly, you're not accessible like before. Suddenly, you're unpredictable. And nothing makes a person feel more off balance than losing their ability to control your emotional state. You become untouchable when your peace no longer depends on anyone else's presence. When you detach, you stop looking to someone else for emotional safety. You find it in yourself. You no longer need constant reassurance or attention to feel secure. You become your own source of stability. And that inner stability radiates outward. It becomes the energy people feel when they interact with you. A calm, steady presence. A woman who knows her worth. A woman who doesn't tolerate emotional turbulence as the price of being loved. Men are deeply affected by this kind of detachment, especially when they're used to you being emotionally invested. They expect a response. They expect an argument. They expect you to chase. And when you don't, they're left in a space of uncertainty that they're not equipped to handle. They begin to feel what you used to feel, confused, unsure, anxious. But you're no longer the one holding on to those emotions. You've handed them back. And now they're left to process what it means to no longer be the center of your emotional world. This cold strategy of detachment is not for punishment, it's for protection. You're protecting your energy, your time, your heart. You're refusing to give premium access to someone who doesn't treat it like it's valuable. Detachment means you are no longer emotionally available to situations that drain you. You reserve your energy for people who bring clarity, not confusion. You invest in peace, not in potential. You walk away from the promise of love that only shows up in fragments. Because now you understand that love, real love, doesn't come with emotional manipulation. It comes with consistency. And if that consistency isn't present, your emotions are no longer up for negotiation. With emotional detachment, you become a fortress, not hard or bitter, but strong and selective. You choose when to open the gates. You choose who has access. And if someone wants to be close to you again, they must come with more than just empty words or fleeting actions. They must come with intention, with clarity, and with respect. Because you've made it clear through your detachment that you are no longer a playground for inconsistency. You are not waiting around hoping for someone to value you. You are walking forward, centered in your worth, unshaken by absence, and unfazed by emotional games. One of the most powerful shifts you can make when someone pulls away or begins to take you for granted is to become fully invested in your own evolution. This is not about pretending to be busy or playing games. It's about genuinely choosing to pour all your emotional, mental, and spiritual energy back into yourself. The reason this strategy works is because it removes the energy of desperation and replaces it with the energy of growth. People are not drawn to neediness. They are drawn to confidence, elevation, and focus. When a man senses that your attention is no longer on him, but rather on your purpose, your body, your goals, and your dreams, he feels it in ways he cannot explain. That energetic shift becomes magnetic. You stop waiting for a message and start writing your own future. You stop obsessing over his silence and begin filling your own space with sound. Sound from your workouts, your meditation playlists, your business plans, your side hustles, your new routines. You no longer wait around wondering where things went wrong. Instead, you step into the power of doing things right for yourself. You take that energy that once begged for his attention and reinvest it into your glow up, your healing, your reinvention. And it's not about making him jealous. It's about choosing yourself so boldly that people who thought you'd always be available start questioning their assumptions. Men are wired to respond to challenge, to movement, to momentum. When he sees that you are no longer stagnant, no longer orbiting around him like a satellite, something inside him shifts. The balance of power changes. He realizes he's no longer the sun in your universe, and that bothers him. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you've reclaimed your center. When you're focused on evolving, you naturally become more distant, but not in a bitter or cold way. You become distant in a way that says, I no longer revolve around you, I revolve around purpose. You begin waking up earlier. Your health becomes your top priority. You fill your body with intention. You move differently. You walk with purpose. You speak with conviction. You start showing up for yourself in ways you once reserved only for him. The glow up is not just physical. It's mental, emotional, spiritual. You begin mastering the art of presence, of being fully in your own moment, of not needing external validation to feel alive. That independence is powerful. That freedom makes you radiant. And without saying a word, you are saying everything. I am no longer waiting. What's extraordinary is that this focus on personal growth becomes the very thing that makes him miss you. Because now you're no longer accessible. You're no longer emotionally invested in what he's doing or not doing. Your time is spent in growth, reading, learning, training, building. You're investing in your future while he's still stuck in the past. And when he finally looks up to check on you, you're no longer where he left you. You've moved, you've evolved. You're becoming someone he now has to catch up to. And that's when the chase begins again. Not because you planned it, but because you became someone worth chasing all over again. Your energy becomes rare. Your presence becomes valuable. Your time becomes expensive. Because now you understand your worth isn't tied to someone else's attention. It's tied to how deeply you commit to your own evolution. This is the kind of shift that cannot be faked. It cannot be acted. It has to be real. Your transformation has to come from within. You have to want it, not to provoke a reaction from him, but because you are ready to become the woman who doesn't need him to feel whole. That kind of woman doesn't go unnoticed. Her silence speaks volumes. Her absence echoes. Her presence, when it returns, is felt in every room she enters. You stop checking your phone every 5 minutes. You stop replaying old conversations. You stop stalking his social media. Why? Because you're too busy building your empire. You're too focused on your growth to be distracted by someone who couldn't see your value when you were offering it freely. That shift creates a gravitational pull. When you become aligned with your higher self, when you focus on becoming your best version, you naturally rise above the noise. You begin attracting people, opportunities, and energies that match your elevation. And the man who once thought you'd always be there, he begins to miss what he can no longer reach easily. Because now you are no longer his emotional crutch. You're not there to fill his voids. You're not available to ease his guilt. You are not an option because you've made yourself a priority. This cold strategy of focusing on yourself is not cold at all. It's clarity. It's you waking up and realizing that waiting for him to change won't bring peace. Waiting for him to understand your value won't bring healing. Only you can do that. Only you can rise from the pain and decide to become better instead of bitter. And when you start that journey, when your days are no longer defined by what he says or does, but by what you choose to build, you become powerful beyond measure. Because now you're not seeking attention, you're commanding respect. You're not begging to be seen. You're being noticed by default, not because you asked for it, but because your energy no longer chases, it attracts. When you cut emotional supply, you are doing more than just going silent. You are removing the fuel that kept his ego burning. Emotional supply comes in many forms. Texting back quickly, checking in on him, asking if he's okay, explaining yourself, defending your worth, reacting to his distance, trying to prove you're still loyal, still loving, still available. All of these gestures may seem harmless or even loving on the surface, but when someone has taken your presence for granted, these actions become permission slips. They give him room to assume that no matter what he does or doesn't do, you'll be there, still emotionally attached, still available for him to lean on when it's convenient. But the moment you withdraw that emotional energy, the entire dynamic begins to crumble. Not in a destructive way, but in a way that exposes what was really holding it all together. Your willingness to give more than you received. Cutting off emotional supply doesn't mean becoming cruel or bitter. It doesn't mean pretending to be unaffected. It means acknowledging that your feelings deserve to be respected, your boundaries deserve to be honored, and your presence deserves to be appreciated. You stop reacting to his breadcrumbs. You stop responding to half-hearted efforts. You no longer initiate conversations. You no longer chase closure. Instead, you go quiet, not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself more. That silence, that absence of validation, attention, and emotional labor becomes deafening. And it's in that silence where he starts to notice what he lost. You were the warmth. You were the safe space. You were the consistent heartbeat in his chaotic world. And now you're gone. Not in body perhaps, but in spirit, in energy, in emotion. You've shut the faucet that kept pouring out reassurance, forgiveness, and understanding. And when that happens, he doesn't just notice the absence, he starts to feel the weight of it. He may not have appreciated the source when he had it, but now that it's gone, he realizes there wasn't just comfort, it was power. It was the kind of emotional richness that he thought would always be there until it wasn't. This cold strategy works not because you're trying to manipulate, but because it forces the other person to confront the void they created. It makes them sit with their choices without the cushion of your love softening the blow. They begin to replay conversations in their mind. They check their phone expecting a message from you, and there's nothing. No check-ins, no questions, no signs that you're still waiting. The silence begins to scream. The emotional energy they fed on begins to feel like a ghost haunting their thoughts. This is when they start to miss you, not just as a person, but as a presence. Because your emotional supply was never basic. It was sacred. And now that it's gone, the absence becomes an unspoken mirror reflecting everything they took for granted. You reclaim your peace. You protect your energy. You guard your heart, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You no longer give to someone who doesn't know how to receive with gratitude. The emotional power you once invested outward now gets recycled inward. You use that energy to nourish yourself, to rebuild your sense of self-worth, to reconnect with the woman you were before you made someone else your emotional priority. And in doing so, you become untouchable. Not cold, not heartless, but whole. And whole women do not beg. They do not chase. They do not explain their silence. He may reach out eventually, sensing the loss, trying to test if that supply is still available, but you don't respond like you used to. You don't jump at every message. You don't interpret a hey as a sign of renewed interest. because now you see things clearly. You understand that attention is not affection and consistency is the only true form of love. Anything less is noise. You've stopped giving your energy to noise. You've learned the discipline of silence, not the passive kind, but the intentional kind, the kind that speaks volumes without saying a word. People don't value what they can easily access, and that includes your emotions. When your emotional availability was limitless, it was treated like background noise. But when it's gone, the silence becomes the loudest teacher. He starts to understand that your love wasn't ordinary. It was depth. It was loyalty. It was rare. And now it's unavailable, not because you're playing games, but because you've elevated. You've outgrown the version of yourself that over-explains, that overextends, that overcompensates. There's a new standard now. And it's built on the premise that your emotions are sacred. You no longer pour into empty vessels. You no longer serve where you're not fed. You no longer offer warmth to someone who left you in the cold. That shift is not just healing, it's transformational. You become the woman who doesn't need to say anything to be missed. Your absence becomes a presence. Your silence becomes a force. Your emotional detachment becomes the very thing that wakes him up. And when that realization hits, he won't just miss you, he'll feel the loss in his soul. Because it wasn't just a relationship that faded, it was access to something divine that he never learned how to hold.